And so we've talked about how there's 40 million people dealing with migraine disorder. Current NIH funding, NIH National Institute of Health funding for headaches is 0.2% of their budget.
Jeez.
0.2% of their budget. And they're spending probably, I don't have the exact figures in front of me, but like 76 times more for Parkinson's, 102 times more for Alzheimer's. And of course, these other disorders deserve a fair amount of funding too. But quite frankly, it doesn't match the proportion, right? Because Congress actually has passed certain bills that saying that the amount of research that goes towards researching a certain disorder should be proportional to the amount of people impacted. But we're not saying this in practice because headache patients, there are a lot of us, 40 million, but we only receive 0.2% of the funding.
Business with a servant's heart. Welcome to the podcast. Business with a servant's heart. Listen to the podcast. We're all about to talk on life. Our guest will share his life story. We want you to success in life. We're ready and we will start shortly. We're gonna talk on life. We're gonna talk on business. You're gonna shine bright. We are gonna witness.
Shout out to my sponsors, A Mind for All Seasons. Your brain is your greatest competitive edge, so why not optimize it? Just text OPTIMIZE to 72000, 72000 for instant access to 6 quick videos that help you think faster, remember more, and stay focused longer. A big thanks to Epic App, the 4-step storytelling system I use every day to connect and to convert. Try it free. Email me at stever1961@gmail.com. That's stevr1961@gmail.com, and I'll get you the free app. Doing Business with a Servant's Heart was just named top 6 in small business marketing. Thank you, everybody, for listening and watching. Welcome, everyone, to Doing Business with a Servant's Heart podcast. I'm your host, Steve Ramona. Very fired up for you today because guess what? You're going to learn headaches. How many of you had a headache? Raise your hand. Probably a lot of you, and me, everybody, at one time in our life. And my guest just told me, amazingly enough, 40 million people live with headaches. Of course, different degrees, but I think everybody's had one or another, especially if you're a drinker. Not saying anything about it, but a hangover definitely gives you a headache. But he's got some great ideas how we can serve you, the audience, and serve people handling headaches. And he just got back from DC with some great input and some great information as well. So let's bring our guest on. Jimmy, welcome to the show.
Hi, Steve. Thank you for having me.
You're a concussion expert, I'll say, and it's probably different words. Why did you dive into headaches?
Well, I think a big part of it is my own personal history of headaches. So I'm a chronic headache patient, and I think what really drew me to it is I'm in this kind of bucket where a lot of diagnostic lines get blurred. So obviously it sucks for me, but it also really opened my world to this world of headache. And people often think of headaches as a people don't take headaches very seriously. People often think, oh, it's just a headache. But once you take a deeper look, you're going to understand that headaches are a large amount of people in this country are severely impacted by headache. And also understanding that several headache disorders, they actually go beyond headache. They are complex neurological disorders, and they don't just affect the systems of the head and neck. That's generally where they're most focused. But it also influences the whole body oftentimes. So just to give a quick stat that people might not be aware of, there exists over 300 different kinds of headache disorders. 300 different kinds of headache disorders. And over 300, and it's actually the second leading cause of disability in the world. So just behind low back pain. And the interesting thing about migraine is it really peaks during the 20s and 30s. So people are in their prime working years. So the economic loss and missed work and healthcare spending is massive in this country specifically we talk about migraine mostly because that's what the most people are impacted by. And then there are 40 million people dealing with this in the country, but there are only about 900 headache specialist neurologists. So one headache specialist per 44,000 people in the country.
So we're not serving our people with headaches, basically,
Mhm.
because of lack of quality experts.
Yeah, yeah.
How do we
Severely-
fix it?
So the headache community is severely underserved, especially given the volume. I think that's largely because it's an invisible illness. So it's hard to raise funding and awareness for a disorder that you can't see. Contrast this to something like Parkinson's, where the motor deficits and a lot of the things we see are very, very, observable and palpable to people observing this population. So generally speaking, it's easier to get legislation passed for that. So these past 2 days, I was actually in DC and I was lobbying for better headache legislation with a group called the Alliance for Headache Disorders Advocacy Group. So it's an alliance of multiple different groups. And I think this is where it gets interesting too, is, there are different headache advocacy groups. We all came together. But even within those, we have subsets. So we have the Pain Foundation, we have the Migraine Group, and we even have a group that is specifically dedicated to facial pain. We also had a group that was specific towards cyclical vomiting syndrome. Have you heard of this disorder?
No.
It's often comes together with migraine, but essentially what it is people get these long bouts of where they can't stop vomiting for days to weeks to months. So severely disabling disorder, and that's something that unfortunately some headache patients have to deal with. But PCPs, the general public, they're not aware of this. So it takes a long time to get diagnosed, and the average length of time it takes to get diagnosed with migraine disorder is actually 7 years. So 7 years of searching for answers, because these disorders still aren't very well understood by most people. But going back to how we're going to make these changes, so in DC, we were basically advocating for 3 different pieces of legislation. The big one being the Headache Act, and then the other 2 being the STEP Act, as well as the Connect for Health Act. So why don't I go over these one by one, and I'll kind of go from the least impactful to the most impactful, even though they're all impactful. So the Connect for Health Act is pretty straightforward. Basically what it is we're advocating for better telehealth access, specifically related to Medicare. Because we have to remember that there's only one headache specialist per 44,000 in the country. And all these headache centers are generally very concentrated in urban areas. So any headache sufferers in rural areas, if they don't have access to telehealth, it becomes very, very difficult. Now imagine you're someone with severely disabling headaches, you're really sensitive to motion, getting on a car, getting on a plane, 4 to 5 hours trip just to see a headache doctor, right? You get the procedures you need, right? It's really not fair to them. So we definitely need better telehealth access. I was my advocacy group, we were focused on the representatives in California and Oregon. And in Oregon, actually, there's only 9 headache specialists. And so relative to their population, it's actually 1 headache specialist per 70,000 people. And only 1 pediatric headache specialist. Only 1 in the whole state. So telehealth is really important, especially for this population. The next one is the STEP Act. And the STEP Act is talking about basically addressing these fail-first policies that a lot of insurance companies have. So for those who don't know, fail-first policies are basically where, let's say your physician wants to prescribe you a medication, but the medication is expensive. So insurance will not cover the expensive medication until you fail cheaper medications first. So this is a big, big, big problem. This impacts everybody, but I think it disproportionately impacts those dealing with migraine. In this past decade, we've come out with this new class of drugs called the anti-CGRPs, and they are, quite frankly, revolutionary. So they're so effective that they're converting a large proportion of people who have chronic migraine, that's more than 15 migraine days a month, to episodic. So getting them from 20, 30 migraine days a month down to 6 or 7. Really, really wonderful, working really, really well. And all the medical associations are now recommending their first line, but guess what? They're expensive. They're expensive. So insurance requires you to fail certain list of medications first before you even can consider going on that. So what does that look like? Does that really save us any money? And the answer is not really, because when you can't get people on their medication, guess where they go? They go to the emergency room during severe attacks. And that's costing way more. And for headaches, when you go on these different medications, pretty much every medication is going to be a 3-month trial before you know if it works or not. So if insurance companies are requiring you to try out 3 different medications that you have to fail first, all right, we're looking at maybe a 9-month span until someone can get on the medication that the doctor wanted to prescribe initially. Combine that with the fact that we don't have enough headache centers, you're looking at people dealing with 6-month waits, 9 months waits. So you're looking at a year and a half before they actually get on the medication they want. And tacking onto that even more, we said it takes 7 years on average to even get diagnosed, right? So we're looking at like 8.5 years that a lot of people, especially in rural areas, this is a long delay in care. And what we know about migraine disorder is that if you don't address it, it can get worse over time. So addressing it early has a big impact on outcomes. It really helps to control the progression and even bring people into remission, right? But our current system is not set up for that. So these, fail first policies are really setting people up for failure. And the STEP Act isn't even like a blanket thing. It's not saying, all medications. It provides exceptions, very common sense exceptions. Like if you already tried the medication and it worked and then you switch insurance, your new insurance company can't ask you to do the fail first policies again. Can't make you do step therapy again. And then so finally, the really big one that we really want to get through is the Headache Act. So this is a relatively new piece of legislation that's just introduced in 2025. And the Headache Act, what it does is that it forms a national headache disorder initiative. So basically, the initiative, what it is it's going to help coordinate current headache efforts that we already have in this country. Because right now it's very spread out. It's not well consolidated. Has data sharing, creates an advisory council to advise the NIH on how they should be funding for headache disorders, as well as, I'm blanking here. So there's the National Headache Disorder Associative, and then also reporting annually to Congress. So keeping themselves accountable, especially in regards to the budgeting. And so we've talked about how there's 40 million people dealing with migraine disorder. Current NIH funding, NIH National Institute of Health funding for headaches is 0.2% of their budget.
Jeez.
0.2% of their budget. And they're spending probably, I don't have the exact figures in front of me, but like 76 times more for Parkinson's, 102 times more for Alzheimer's. And of course, these other disorders deserve a fair amount of funding too. But quite frankly, it doesn't match the proportion, right? Because Congress actually has passed certain bills that saying that the amount of research that goes towards researching a certain disorder should be proportional to the amount of people impacted. But we're not saying this in practice, because headache patients, there are a lot of us, 40 million, but we only receive 0.2% of the funding. So that discrepancy really kind of starts to break things down. And then the important thing to remember about the Headache Act, it's largely based off, it was modeled after the plan to end Parkinson's National Bipartisan Act. So it's already based off a model that we know works. And given everything, it's a relatively inexpensive bill to get through. Yeah.
A lot of work. Why are you so passionate about all this work with the headache health? Besides your own, your story, but there's another reason for it.
I think another part of it is I also just find the work very, very interesting, very, very fascinating. I didn't know there were so many different kinds of headache disorders, and they all present very differently. And then, as a physical therapist, a healthcare provider, some of us are just drawn to complex cases. We enjoy the challenge, and we enjoy making a big difference. and headaches are, notoriously challenging. And I also think that's why we have a lack of headache specialists, because it is hard to treat and not everybody wants that. So I think that makes sense. Um, and knowing, I think knowing how many people are out there, knowing how underserved they are, it really drew me in and made me want to work with these patients. And the treatment is pretty fun on my part too, as a physical therapist. So I'm in conservative care, so I don't prescribe any medications or anything. And basically, the way it works with me is I take a systems framework. So I want to be looking at, their, you know, the integrity of their neck, of course. But going a little bit beyond that, I want to be looking at the function of their inner ears, so vestibular function. Taking a look at their eye movements. Are their eye movements coordinated well? So looking at, we call them ocular motor deficits. And like I mentioned, headaches, actually migraine is a whole body disorder. So you'll also find people who maybe they have dysregulated nervous systems, like their blood pressure drops a lot when they stand up, or they sweat profusely, or they get clammy hands. You know, a lot of, we call them autonomic symptoms. And that's something that we can work with too through exercise, kind of retraining the nervous system. So that all sounds very complicated, and it is, but in practice, it's a super fun job. I mean, I just have people stand on like foam surfaces. If I notice people have trouble with certain eye, like jumping between targets with their eyes, then, that's when I break out my Where's Waldo book and we just play Where's Waldo. So it's a really fascinating job, and I get to be creative and make a huge difference.
And your personal story too always helps to that. And telehealth, I love that because you talk Medicare, that's the seniors, and I'm getting there myself.
Mm-hmm.
They're all can jump on an iPad or a phone and do telehealth. It's a component of tech that I think needs to ramp up, and I'm so glad you're doing that, because with the numbers you gave me, the 40 million and 144,000 people can have access to an expert. People could die from a headache, couldn't they?
I don't think they could die.
Okay.
Relatively speaking, these disorders, yeah, they're not, they don't have a high mortality rate, but the quality of life impact is massive, huge.
Yeah, and that's probably worse. Thank you for correcting me. That's
Yeah.
why us hosts, we're not always correct. That's why we get the experts here. Because I'm thinking if your quality of life is diminished for 20 years, that's almost, that, what are you doing? You can't go anything. Like you said, you can't fly, do all that. It's powerful. What do you see after coming back from Washington, D.C., the future looking like with headache health?
It was very exciting. So the group I went with, it's growing every year. This year there were over 300 advocates that went to DC, and we all met with all the representatives. So I can't speak for everyone. In California and Oregon, the representatives that I met, I did 8 meetings. I believe 2 senators, and the rest were Congress. Yeah, and we were focused on Oregon and California. Most of them were already co-sponsors on the Safe Step Act and the Connect Act. So I think there's a lot of forward momentum going there. The Headache Act is slow because it just got introduced, and it's more about forming groups that will push the field forward. So it's a little more abstract than I think, an actual, in terms of the change it's going to provide, it's a little more abstract, which I think might be hard. And right now, we still don't have a lead sponsor in the Senate. We need someone to introduce it in the Senate. So as we know, legislation, the lawmaking process, it's very slow, but I do think we're making some headway, pun intended.
Very good. But among, well, it sounds like that they're very receptive, that's the first big step. And government's not receptive. You're going to be hitting your head, excuse the pun, against the wall, going nowhere. And I love that you said the word momentum, because this is scary. I didn't know this. An audience, I don't know if you know this, because I tell you, I have a headache. I mentioned half-heartedly a hangover. Well, that's still a headache, right? That's still something you have to treat.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's still a headache. I think the Headache Act, I think one thing that was very interesting is, I'm convinced everybody, at least everybody knows at least one person who deals with some form of disabling headache disorder. So when we were doing the lobbying, I would say pretty much every single, we didn't meet with the actual representatives, we met with their staffers. But pretty much every single staffer, when I asked them, do you know someone who deals with migraine, or do you know someone who deals with headache? Several of them were saying, yeah, actually, I deal with it. And they were like, I didn't know this kind of care existed. I didn't know I should go find a headache specialist. Or they say, oh, my mom has migraine. Or one of my close friends has migraine. And so I think that's part of it. That's part of why they were receptive. Once you kind of bring it to their attention and you start talking about it, people don't talk about this kind of stuff because there still is a fair amount of stigma. You know, some people, if you tell them you have a chronic headache disorder, they just chalk it up to, oh, headaches aren't a big deal, right? Which is honestly a ridiculous statement because these headache disorders, they come with a lot of signs besides headache. Headache's just one symptom, right?
Yeah.
Like, kind of the more dramatic ones like cyclical vomiting syndrome. Could you imagine? Could you imagine dealing with something like that?
Scary.
Very scary.
Holy moly.
And then there's also a disorder called new daily persistent headache. Have you heard of this before?
No.
So new daily persistent headache, and I kind of fall into this class a little bit. New daily persistent headache is a headache disorder where one day you wake up or at a certain time of day you develop a headache, and then the headache never goes away. Never. Never. Years and years, 24/7. And the telltale sign is that person can tell you the exact time, the exact day it started.
Wow, that's years. This can go on for years.
Yeah, most likely a lifetime.
Is there a way to remedy it? I don't know if that's the right word, to diminish it?
There's no cure, but you can definitely improve a person's quality of life a lot.
Okay.
So, for me, part of it is medication management, and then the thing that really turned the corner for me was actually vision therapy. So, my eye movements, like I said, these are neurological disorders with neurological findings, and it's very subtle, but my eye movements were not converging well for performing up-close tasks. So I was having a lot of trouble reading, having a lot of trouble on computer screens. I had to leave my job for a while. But now, with all these efforts, I am working again, run a business. So I think if you are a headache patient, definitely don't lose hope. You're working against a lot. We have a lot of systemic inefficiencies, a lot of people falling through the cracks. I think I'm very fortunate. I'm already a healthcare worker. I know how to navigate these issues. I know where to go. I know how to tell if I'm getting good advice. But, if you're not blessed with that, it's definitely infinitely more difficult. But I promise you, if you keep going and you find the right people, eventually it does get better.
Yeah. And what you don't know. And that's why experts like you come to help with headaches and more of these experts. The problem is not glorified. You cure cancer or heal somebody from cancer.
Mm-hmm.
It's huge. Well,
Mm-hmm.
I got Steve Ramona's headache is gone.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Jimmy. It doesn't have that emotion to it, which is sad because it's probably worse. I won't say that, but it's just as important as cancer. It's just
mm-hmm.
a different way of handling it. And I appreciate everything that you're doing to do that. You definitely have passion. How can people reach out and connect with you?
So, you can find me on my website, which is www.pangphysicaltherapy.com, P-A-N-G. And you can also follow me on Instagram at pangphysicaltherapy. And feel free to follow me. I have a podcast specifically dedicated to headaches and dizziness. It's called the Shoulders Up Podcast. You can find it on Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
Shoulders Up Podcast. I love that name. Remember, Shoulders Up Podcast. Yeah. Now, quick question. Everybody listening, can they reach out to you and can you work with them virtually if they're not you're in San Diego, California, if they're not there?
So I can take virtual clients in California, but
beautiful.
Nowhere else in the state. But if anybody's listening to this and they just want some advice, like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know who to go see. I don't know what appointment to make. You're always welcome to shoot me a message on Instagram. I'll take a look. I'm happy to direct you and let you know how to find a provider local to you.
Servant's heart. Jimmy, you started this whole show with a servant's heart. What a great way to end it. And that's powerful because you can't directly work with them, but actually give advice. And, anybody out there listening, if you got friends in California with headache issues, have them reach out And that leads to the subscription. Subscribe to this YouTube channel. Subscribe to Jimmy's YouTube. And here's the power of it. It's a gift. If you're listening and know people that are struggling with headaches, share this podcast with them, or share Shoulders Up podcast with Jimmy as a host, talking about some tips that can help them really have a better quality of life. And that's what a Servant Heart does. Impacts your life. You're impacting somebody else's life that has a headache. And let's end with our gratitude. Today's gratitude is every day is a new chance to be amazing. You are awesome. Boy, what a great way to end this show, because Jimmy is awesome. So reach out to Jimmy, connect with him. If you have any questions, reach out to him. And with that being said, me and Jimmy want to thank all of you for watching or listening to this podcast. And we'll see you all definitely next episode of Doing Business with a Servant's Heart. Have a great day, everyone.